If you have spent any time on LinkedIn lately, you might have noticed that a lot of companies are laying off good, hardworking, mostly tech employees. Phrases like hiring freeze and reshuffling and quiet layoffs are popping up with greater and greater frequency. And unfortunately, it looks like what began in 2022 as little trash smolder is about to turn into a full-blown dumpster fire. So in this video, I am going to address why layoffs are likely to not only continue, but accelerate. And I'm going to provide an understanding for you about how companies typically deal with recessions when they come. And then at the very end, or towards the end, I'm going to provide you with a method that you can use to ascertain if your company is currently at risk of layoffs. So at the very least, you can be prepared. But first, I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Nobody. Nobody sponsors these videos. They offer nothing, and for a limited time, you can use offer code RubberDuckRecruiter to get 20% off absolutely nothing. Alrighty then. With that said, let's jump right into the video. Jeez. Okay, so to understand why the clickbaity title of this video is actually kind of true, we are going to have to understand a little bit of finance and a little bit of economics. Now, I promise this is only going to be like 20% boring and 75% educational and like 5% scripted. As a refresher, inflation occurs when there is too much money circulating throughout an economy. This is exactly what is happening right now in the United States of America. Thanks, COVID. Now, the CPI, or the Consumer Price Index, is what the Fed uses to measure inflation. In the month of September, we clocked in at 8.2% inflation, which is like super high, but like not as bad as August when we clocked in at 8.3% inflation. It's a big dip there. Now, you also may have heard folks talking about increased interest rates, and that's because increasing interest rates is the way that the Fed combats inflation. So why does increasing interest rates make inflation go down? Well, higher interest rates means higher borrowing costs. Higher borrowing costs means people borrow less, which leads to less spending. Less spending means less demand for goods and services, which leads to less money in circulation, which causes inflation to fall. Feel free to rewind that and listen to that again because it took a while for it to make sense for me, and there's no shame in it. The Fed's goal is to get the inflation rate to 2% as quickly as possible, and they are willing to cause some temporary pain in order to make this happen. Hopefully you are still with me because I'm about to actually start tying this whole thing together with layoffs. Now, at the moment, right now, we are sitting at 3.5% unemployment, which means about 5.8 million of us in the United States are unemployed. By 2023, the Fed has said they expect these numbers to reach 4.4%, which means that an additional 1 million jobs might disappear before the end of the year. So why does a recession lead to layoffs? As money gets more expensive to borrow, companies aren't able to invest as readily in new profit-generating ventures. In addition, in a recession, folks tend to covet their money and hold it close, which means demand overall drops and companies have to reduce output or cut jobs to compensate for the decrease in revenue. So how do companies typically deal with a recession? Now, the easiest way to think about this is in terms of profit, revenue, and expense. I gotta say a quick caveat here. I am mostly referring to large companies here. That's companies with 500 employees or more, or revenue that is $1 million or more annually. But these principles are applicable to small businesses as well. During a recession, profits and revenue take a hit. When these revenues take a hit, the decreased earnings show up in quarterly earning reports. And in turn, share prices take a hit, leading to further losses. Now, depending on the magnitude of loss, companies tend to do one of 5 things. DEFCON level emergency 1, reduce hiring. Now, this generally means that the revenue has taken a hit, but it's not so drastic that active measures have to be taken, just a reduction in hiring. DEFCON level 2, impose a hiring freeze. This means that your company took a significant hit and is choosing a passive strategy to cut costs, letting the annual average of attrition at your company cut costs on its own and increase profits that way. DEFCON level 3, suspend pay raises. This means that your company has taken a severe hit and is willing to risk very high attrition by not raising salaries, and they're trying to use that as a compensation for loss of revenue. DEFCON level 4 is layoffs. This means that your company has been hit very, very hard and now must impose an active strategy to bring down costs. Otherwise, it could lead to catastrophic losses. And DEFCON level 5 bonus, bankruptcy. This means that your company is no longer a company. So now that we have set the groundwork for understanding why recessions lead to layoffs and how companies typically deal with them, let's answer the question that you probably came here for in the first place. Are you going to get laid off? Now, I don't have a crystal ball to answer this question, but what I do have is a few principles that can point you in the right direction, and you can at least get a sense of how much risk there is for layoffs at your current company. So the first thing to look at when you're assessing the layoff risk is look at the revenue change from last year to this year. Now, based on the severity of revenue loss, you can make an assumption on what level of response might be needed from your company to compensate for that loss. Second thing that you can look at is profit change. So the question is, how much has the profit margin changed since last year? If the profit is still healthy at your company, then a passive strategy like a hiring freeze or a reshuffle or just a reduction in hiring may be enough to weather this recession and not go through layoffs. However, if the profit margin has taken a substantial hit, then layoffs might be imminent. The last thing that you can look at is expense change. Now, for the vast majority of companies, expenses will increase year over year. So staving off layoffs often involves cutting these expenses. For instance, research and development, R&D, focused on developing new products or revenue streams can temporarily be put on pause to weather a recession. Final thoughts. Now, on a real note, I know that times like this can be scary, and as a recruiter, but also just as a person that has to undergo it myself, the best thing that you can do and the thing that I'm gonna do is make sure that my LinkedIn is as marketable as possible. I'm also gonna connect a bit deeper with my network because I know that the best way to get a job in the modern age is to be referred. And the last thing I'm gonna do is cut expenses and prepare for what could be a season of professional and financial endurance for me. I want to remind you and remind myself that these recessions have happened many times before, and without exception, eventually we have transitioned into an era of new opportunities and growth once the recession ends. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, consider subscribing, liking, and as always, may the job security odds be ever in your favor.